Matt Schaff and Jared Smola of DraftSharks.com here to dig into week 3. And of course, we've been digging into week 3 since before the week 2 games ended on DraftSharks.com. If you're a DS Insider, you got our weekly Sunday night email that includes immediate injury news from the games that day, along with early waiver considerations. We, of course, have the week 3 rankings up on the site by midday Tuesday, along with waiver articles for offense and IDP. Trade targets are up there. Weekly dynasty updates are up there. Jared's usage article and matchups that matter are up there. And we will be taking lots of those usage and matchup items to put together this show today, looking at some of the tougher decisions facing you as you set your week 3 lineups. You, of course, have the team intel page also helping you set those lineups because it knows the specifics of your league. But Jared, we're going to go, as we do every Thursday, by position, talk about some of the more interesting players for start-sit decisions. And we'll start at quarterback. And I don't think it gets more interesting right now than Derek Carr and the Saints. And the question, I think, is not, do you pick him up? Is he worthwhile in fantasy? I think it's, how high should Derek Carr sit in the week 3 quarterback rankings? So what's your answer for that?
I mean, I look at our rankings and even look at the projections. There's kind of a teardrop after the top 10. And quarterback 10 for us this week is actually Anthony Richardson, which might surprise some people. But I mean, to me, I'd have trouble starting Carr over any of those 10 guys, including Richardson. After that, though, I think you could argue him up to quarterback 11. We have Carr quarterback 12 right now, just behind Jared Goff. I think those guys would be a tough decision for me too. Good offenses, high implied totals this week. I mean, Carr, we talked about it on the waiver show. He's playing awesome. Offensive coordinator Clint Kubiak is calling an awesome game right now, working guys wide open all over the field. And then Carr is home for this Eagles defense that through 2 weeks, they're 25th in pass defense DVOA. They're 24th in fantasy points allowed to quarterback. So should be another high scoring game. I don't expect Carr to cool off this week.
Yeah, 3rd highest implied team total for this week. So Vegas is like, yeah, Saints look like they're going to score points. The Eagles defense has been bad so far. I don't know how deep that Saints offense is, and we'll see how they do throughout the season, but there's enough talent in Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed to support things. We're going to talk about Shaheed a little bit later as we get into the wide receivers. But yeah, I like Derek Carr in that range. I wouldn't fight anybody who wanted to start him over Anthony Richardson this week. We've seen kind of the 2 extremes of Richardson so far, where week 1, 2 rushing touchdowns made him a good play. Last week, he did nothing against the Packers, and that's kind of what you bought into.
Yeah, that's going to be the Richardson story, I think, at least early in his career. I kind of think you just got to commit to him as your guy and kind of take the ups and downs. Obviously, tough matchup for Richardson against the Bears this weekend, but I'd have trouble sitting him for Carr.
Jared Goff is another guy that you mentioned right in that range. It seems like he let us down last week. He had huge passing volume, 55 attempts in that game against the Bucs, who should have been a pushover of an opponent. Missing Antoine Winfield, haven't been great in pass defense, but it just didn't work out that way. I think it was a bit of an illusion, though, how poorly it might seem the Lions played, Jared, because the yardage was there. They just couldn't finish off touchdowns.
Yeah, that was part of it. I mean, he had, 327 yards, I think, but it came on 55 attempts, like you mentioned, Matt. I mean, honestly, Goff has not played well through 2 weeks. I haven't thought so. And you look at the PFF grades, he's 27th among quarterbacks in passing grades. But to me, we just have enough of a sample of Goff in this offense where I do think he's going to bounce back. And you really couldn't ask for a better bounce back opportunity than this week against Arizona. They're 24th in pass defense DVOA through 2 weeks. I think they might even finish the season lower than that. The Lions are tied for the highest implied point total of the week at 27.25 points. And this game has the highest over-under of the week. Really should be a high-scoring game. I've liked Goff in both weeks 1 and 2, and it's kind of backfired. I like him again this week, and I'm just going to stick with him. If he disappoints again this week, then it'll be time to start worrying about him going forward.
And the Vegas line with the highest over-under of the week for this Lions game against the Cardinals this week says you should keep liking the Lions offense, and it's kind of difficult to like an offense and not like the quarterback. So I'll stick with it as well. We've seen offense be down across the league early this season. And Jared, it kind of coincides with the league playing less in the preseason. So I'll be curious to see if, as we get further into the regular season, everybody just kind of gets going better.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think in general, we're going to see more points going forward. There are some interesting league-wide trends between 2 weeks, like passing rate being down considerably, just plays per game being down considerably. Again, it's just 2 weeks, so it's probably small sample stuff, but it'll be interesting to track going forward. Because if something like pass rate does stay down, then that impacts our flex decisions, right? Do we want to play running backs over wide receivers? So we're definitely keeping an eye on it and factoring it all into our projections.
Don't worry, Mel Kiper Jr. has the old man shaking a fist at a cloud solution for our passing woes in the NFL. If people haven't seen that yet, feel free to search it up. It was on, I think, ESPN's Get Up this morning, and it's truly stupid. One of those takes where you if you hear it from your grandpa or your father-in-law or uncle or whatever in the living room, you're like, okay, pal, but then sometimes it gets put on ESPN.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was like an Onion article at first, but it was real.
Geno Smith is real as well. QB 10 and QB 6 fantasy finishes through the first 2 weeks. This week, another good spot. 4th best passing matchup, according to Jared, Matchups That Matter article by DVOA. Geno Smith looks like a weekly starter consideration at this point, right?
Yeah, the only disappointing thing is like the Dolphins aren't going to have Tua, and that kind of kills the upside of the game. Maybe. I mean, we'll see what Skylar Thompson does. There's still obviously weapons there, but I didn't think Geno played well week 1. He was awesome in week 2. 75% completion rate for Geno, 327 passing yards, and that was despite the Seahawks being charged with 5 drops. So, Geno could have like approached 400 passing yards in that game against a pretty solid Patriots defense. The Dolphins defense is not as good. So I think Geno's a safe play this week, even if the upside is more capped without Tua.
And it's not just Geno Smith, of course, in that offense. We're going to talk about a couple more Seahawks at other positions. But for now, it's on to Justin Fields. And I think, Jared, if people had known heading into the season, we would get 2 Justin Fields starts to begin the year and looking like a third in week 3. We'd have people excited about the Pittsburgh quarterback at this point. Yeah. He has fared better as a passer than expected, just from an efficiency and, eye test standpoint, but only QB 20 and QB 26 finishes through 2 weeks. One primary culprit there is Pittsburgh, second lowest pass rate versus expected so far, and trailing only Green Bay, which has Malik Willis and his puking center to thank for that one. So what do we make of Justin Fields, both for this week and kind of going forward?
I think it'll get better than the quarterback finishes you mentioned that he's had so far because of the rushing. Now, I don't think we're very often going to get the type of ceiling games we've seen from Fields in the past, just because this is an Arthur Smith offense. The Steelers don't want to win high-scoring games. They want to win these, low-scoring slugfests. Speaking of slugfest, this game against the Chargers this week, 35.5-point over-under. I mean, you're going to see a ton of running of the football. The Chargers' defense has been good so far. Fields is well into quarterback 2 territory in our rankings. I think he's okay. The floor is okay because of the rushing. But again, I just don't think you're going to get those, week-winning performances very often from Fields this season.
Yeah, and part of his rushing upside is in the passing, where you let him scramble as opposed to simply designing the stuff. So we'll see where it goes. 3rd most QB carries so far, just the 6th most QB rushing yards. I agree the floor is okay for that, but the ceiling is going to be limited. And then we'll see about Russell Wilson once he's ready to play. Sam Darnold has impressed plenty of people, including us so far. He is not in starter territory this week, though. For me, the keys there are the Vikings wide receivers are not especially healthy, and Houston's been pretty good. Yeah. 5th best pass defense by DVOA so far this season. So I'm not looking to get Sam Darnold into 1 QB lineups. What about you?
Yeah, no, you nailed it. The wide receiver injuries in the matchup. I mean, Darnold just finished quarterback 4 last week against San Francisco, but I think this is his toughest matchup of the season so far. I definitely prefer Carr, Goff, I think Baker Mayfield. I would rather use it as a streamer over Darnold this week. But it's been an impressive start for Darnold, and there are going to be plenty of weeks going forward where he might sneak into our top 12 quarterbacks.
Would you rather have Sam Darnold on your roster right now, or Trevor Lawrence, or Caleb Williams?
I would take Darnold over Lawrence. I don't think I'd drop Caleb Williams for Sam Darnold right now.
So what is it about Caleb Williams that makes you want to keep him around as opposed to Trevor Lawrence?
I mean, one, I still believe in the talent, right? I mean, what he did in college, both on the stat sheet and on film, I'm still buying talent. The other thing with Caleb Williams, he's opened the season against Tennessee and Houston. Those teams rank 9th and 5th in pass defense DVOA. So it's just been 2 tough matchups to start Caleb Williams' career. Next 4 games for Caleb, and next 3 in particular, Colts, Rams, and Panthers. That's why I wouldn't want to drop Caleb right now, because I think, 2 weeks from now, we could be talking about him as a potential top 12 quarterback. Lawrence, we've done it with this guy, right? Like, he's never been like a difference maker in fantasy. He's had okay seasons, top 15 fantasy seasons, but he's just, we're 4 years into his career now, and he just hasn't done it yet. So getting tired of waiting on Lawrence to be something in fantasy.
Yeah, I think that's fair if you're deciding between those 2 guys. I'd personally rather have Sam Darnold on my roster than either of these guys right now, but I can see the upside case for Caleb Williams. It is just 2 games in so far. You mentioned that stretch he's got coming up. So, if your QB2 is just somebody that's sitting on your bench and you're starting somebody every week, there's not really much to lose by sitting on Caleb Williams for now and seeing what happens over the next few games. Probably going to be other options available if your starter gets hurt and Williams does not deliver soon. We'll see where they go. I think among all of the other guys that we talked about in this QB section, Justin Fields is probably the only one that I'm not picking up in favor of these guys. And for him, it's mostly that I don't know that he's staying as the starter once Russell Wilson is back healthy.
Yeah, it's fair. I could see if they drop a couple games, them going back to Russell Wilson. Seems like they wanted Wilson to be the guy all along, but Wilson hasn't let it happen, and Fields has won a couple games. So
running back, speaking of the Seahawks earlier, now it's Zach Charbonnet. Started last week in place of Ken Walker. We're going to see if Ken Walker's ready to return this week. It's currently Charbonnet in our rankings for week 3. And Jared, when you're making a decision on Zach Charbonnet, he's kind of becoming a poster boy for the whole running backs don't matter thing. It's usage versus production when you're determining how high he belongs in the rankings, or, who you're starting him over. What's your case for Zach Charbonnet this week? Where do you have him?
The case is usage, which, the type of usage he got in week 2 with Walker out, we don't see it in the NFL anymore. He played 95% of Seattle's offensive snaps, got every single one of the running back carries, 5 targets for an 11% target share. So truly controlling the backfield. No one else in that backfield got a touch. So if we can get anything close to that again this week, which I think we will, assuming Ken Walker's out, that just gives Charbonnet a super high fantasy floor. And he's in a good spot this week. We talked about this Dolphins defense not being great against the pass. They haven't been great against the run either. They've allowed 5.0 yards per carry to running back so far. Charbonnet Seahawks are, home favorites in this game. So it's a really good spot for a guy getting a heavy workload. I'd be happy if Charbonnet was in my starting lineup this week.
He's been getting strong receiving usage, not only last week, but in the few times where he has been the starter for Seattle over his, 1+ year career so far. As you mentioned, RB8 last week in PPR. If you take out the touchdowns, he's RB14. So he certainly was a bit TD reliant. In addition to the 5 catches, he had 4 rushing. And that's been the other story of his starting opportunities so far. He's had 4 games of double-digit carries to this point. And Charbonnet has gone for 2.7, 3.1, 3.4, and 3.2 yards per rush. So he's been an inefficient runner, which makes him more touchdown reliant and or more reception reliant. Certainly, I think he's less attractive if you're outside of PPR, a bit less attractive in half PPR versus full PPR. The usage is there, though. It certainly propels him into the discussion, at least among the top 16, 18 running backs. I have him a bit lower this week than Jared does, but it's really like, does he get that touchdown luck? And he's in position to get touchdown luck because of the usage and because Seattle's been playing well. So at some point I have to stop arguing against him and be like, yeah, he makes sense because of how often he's going to get the ball.
Yeah, I think most fantasy teams are going to be starting Charbonnet this weekend. You'd have to have, 2, I think, pretty locked in top 10 running backs for me not to want to start Charbonnet. Again, the floor is just super. I mean, you said it, Matt, RB14 without a touchdown. Like, I'll take that all day, right? If I think that's pretty close to my running back's floor, I think that makes him a really strong fantasy play.
Kyren Williams is not somebody you probably would have been expecting to decide between Charbonnet and him by week 3 of the season, but things are looking, I don't want to say bleak, but rough for Williams. The Puka Nacua injury and then the Cooper Kupp injury obviously affect the wide receiver situation for the Rams, but I think there's going to be impact beyond that. And I think it's about to spread to Kyren Williams.
I mean, Kyren Williams at this point, his situation is not too dissimilar from Zach Charbonnet. Like, the good news is he's still dominating backfield work. Those Blake Corum carries last week all came in total garbage time. It was Kyren Williams when that game was, anywhere close to still up for grabs. The Rams offense is the issue, obviously. The Rams are implied for 18.75 points this week. Yes, it's against the 49ers, good defense, but still, they'd be up into the 20s if the wide receivers were healthy and if the offensive line was healthier. They are getting their left tackle back this week, Alaric Jackson, who was suspended for the first 2 games of the season. But, again, they're still missing 3 of their other, starting offensive linemen. So I think Williams, again, like Charbonnet, tough to bench because he's a good bet for 15 plus touches with a chance to get 20 plus. You could even see him get more work in the passing game. But I think the upside is quite a bit less exciting at this point with how this Rams offense looks right now.
Yeah, I would be trying to trade Kyren Williams right now because of how things look in that offense. We've seen the rushing get harder for Kyren Williams early this year. Last year, he went for 3.0 yards before contact per carry. He also faced the lowest rate of 8+ man boxes of any qualifying running back in the league, according to NFL Next Gen Stats. Just 4.8% of his runs came on plays where he saw 8+ people in the box on defense. That's already up to 13.3% this year, which is still low, but, well up from last year's rate. I got to think that rate increases further with Puka and Cooper Kupp out, unless, of course, Jordan Whittington throws his Clark Kent glasses aside this week and reveals that he's got a cape on, we'll see. Kyren Williams from 3.0 yards before contact per carry last year. He's at 1.1 so far this year. That's a big difference when you're getting your run started. And again, I think it speaks to a situation that's not quite as good as we were hoping it was going to be, and why I would try to sell Kyren before he kind of reveals how rough the situation could be.
I think you're hoping for Sean McVay to work some magic. I think he is, one of the better offensive minds in the game. So we'll see if he can come up with something to make this Rams offense at least, league average over the next few weeks, at least until Kupp comes back.
We'll see if the Bears can come up with something to make their offense league average. Because in addition to Caleb Williams' slow start that you were talking about, DeAndre Swift has been pretty bad so far, along with the rest of his offensive teammates. Situation has the potential to be good. There's plenty of talent there. What are you doing with DeAndre Swift this week?
Yeah, 2.0 yards per carry for Swift so far, like unbelievably inefficient. And again, like we said with Caleb, tough matchups against Houston and Tennessee. Those teams rank 5th and 17th in run defense DVOA through 2 weeks. Tennessee down at 17th. I think they're even better than that. Bears O-line is a problem. Swift has not been good either, though. He is at negative 2.4 rush yards over expected per attempt. That's the second worst in the league so far. So I think this is kind of like a make or break week for Swift potentially, where if he does not get it going against the Colts, this is a great matchup for Swift. The Colts are 30th in run defense DVOA. Joe Mixon and Josh Jacobs have topped 150 rushing yards against them in the first 2 weeks of the season. So good spot for Swift to get going. If he doesn't, though, I wouldn't be surprised if the Bears start turning more to Khalil Herbert. Maybe Roshan Johnson gets into the mix. Herbert's someone I grabbed on a few waiver wires this week, just again, in case Swift sucks again in week 3, maybe Herbert does start to get some run.
Colts defense off to a rough start against the run so far. They will not have DeForest Buckner this week, their big defensive tackle, or at least 3 more games beyond that. So I agree. I mean, if they don't get it going, at least on the ground this week, then you really have to wonder about them. Zack Moss is right by DeAndre Swift in our running back rankings this week. And even though we just said the stuff about Swift's matchup, I think I might start Zack Moss over Swift this week if I've got that decision. What do you like about the Bengals running back?
Yeah, Moss is probably my favorite running back by low right now. Obviously hasn't put up big fantasy numbers yet, but he's really controlling this Bengals backfield, and his role even grew from week 1 to week 2. He was at 65% of the offensive snaps in the opener, 82% last week. Moss has outcarried Chase Brown 21-7. He's even out-targeted him 5-3. I think, we thought maybe Brown would do more of the pass catching stuff this season. That hasn't been the case. Moss leads in targets. This is the spot, I think, for Moss to get going. The Bengals big home favorites against the Commanders. They have a 27.25 point implied total. That's tied for highest on the week. The Commanders have allowed 4.6 yards per carry through running back. So I think you look at the volume Moss has gotten so far, and then this matchup, I think he kind of gets going. And then, by the way, he gets Carolina next week too. So now's the time to buy Moss, I think, before these next 2 matchups.
Yeah, and if you have Zack Moss and you're just looking at things through the scope of his usage so far, it might seem like by his carry totals that he's splitting, but it hasn't been the case as much as we expected heading into the season. So, it's 2 weeks. Maybe we'll see week 3 go back in the other direction where he doesn't have quite the grip on the job, but maybe we won't. If we do have the same thing that we had in week 2, it's a good spot. Like you said, we could get big production. We could have Zack Moss looking like a very attractive fantasy running back as soon as week 4. So yeah, there's nothing wrong with at least doing a price check on him this week. And if you've got Moss and you've been like, maybe he shouldn't stay on my roster, keep him through this week's game against Washington and then see where we're at. Zamir White, kind of in a similar spot. He has not been good through the first 2 weeks, but also has a positive matchup this week. What are you doing with Zamir White for week 3?
Something's got to give in this matchup. The Raiders as a team are averaging 2.5 yards per carry. Zamir White's at 3.1 yards per carry. Carolina's given up 333 rushing yards to running backs through 2 games, 4.9 yards per carry. So if there's ever a spot for Zamir White, with the Raiders 5-point home favorites, so he should have game flow in his favor this week. If there's ever a spot for White to get going, this is it. It'll be, full panic mode if he doesn't do anything in this game.
Although we'll see what Andy Dalton has to say about this game script. If Zamir White does do something for you this week, I say you go ahead and try to sell him, because I don't particularly believe in the player or the offense. And then week 4 holds a tougher matchup with the Browns overall on defense. After that, Denver and Pittsburgh, also top half run defenses by DVOA. So I think ideally you get a really good game from Zamir White this week, and then you dump him on some league mate.
I'm definitely with that. Issues with White, he's obviously losing the passing down snaps to Alexander Madison. We also saw Madison get some goal line carries last week. So I'm totally with you. If White gives you, a top 20, 25 fantasy finish this week, I would definitely be looking to sell him immediately.
You can find Zack Moss and Zamir White listed as sneaky starters in Jared's Matchups That Matter article that posted Thursday morning. might be the most easily digestible article that we put out all week, and plenty of nutritional value too. No filler. You're digesting good stuff that's going to help you know how to set your lineups for the week and maybe buy players or sell players for the weeks ahead. You can tell by the picture on that article that even Zack Moss is surprised we're talking about him as much as we are, but you will also find Moss in this week's trade targets article on draftsharks.com. So check both of those out. On to wide receiver, Jared. Probably the toughest situation to gauge here is the Dolphins with no Tua for at least the next 4 games starting this week. We've got Tyreek Hill 7th in our PPR rankings at the position. What are you personally doing with Hill this week?
As that ranking would suggest, he'd be really tough to bench just because, all it takes is one play. And we do have Mike McDaniel here, who's one of the better schemers in the NFL. Like, if he can just get Tyreek free one time, that could make his fancy day. Now, we have 3 games of Skylar Thompson from 2022, and it wasn't good for Tyreek Hill. He did see 9 targets per game. That's fine. Caught 5.3 per game, just 46 receiving yards per game, 0 touchdowns. The numbers for Jaylen Waddle with Skylar Thompson, even worse, just 5.3 targets, 3.7 catches, 37 yards, 0 touchdowns. So not good. I will say about those games, 2 of them came against the Jets and 1 of them came against the Bills in the playoffs. So they were tougher matchups. Like, I think it's going to be better for these guys going forward, but they obviously both take a pretty significant hit. Skylar Thompson just, is not a NFL quality starter.
Well, it's also worth noting, though, for Skylar Thompson's sake, that the reason he gets the shot here is because the Dolphins decided he's a better option than Mike White, who, of course, was the fill-in for the Jets a couple of years ago, then got signed as the backup in Miami. And this summer, Skylar Thompson beat out Mike White for the backup job. So we should expect a better version of Skylar Thompson than what we've seen in the past. Exactly what that looks like, we'll have to see. And that's why you've got to have the Dolphins wide receivers down a little bit. But at some level, you got to be like, all right, it's Tyreek Hill or it's Jaylen Waddle. I got to go ahead and take a shot on this guy, and then we'll see what happens. Around Hill in our rankings this week, I think I'd start Devontae Smith, Chris Olave, Devontae Adams if I was making those decisions. I think those are probably more start 2 wide receiver decisions. If you've got 3 wide receiver spots, you probably got room for all those guys. I think among guys that are, within our top 16 that are realistically potentially on the same roster and maybe have this decision, Chris Godwin, I would probably start over Tyreek Hill just because he's been very good through 2 weeks. And in that matchup with Denver, I think he's probably going to avoid Patrick Surtain for the most part in that game. Brandon Ayuk is kind of on that I could go either way level. He's at the Rams. There's no Debo. That should help his target share. We also know that the 49ers don't want to throw a ton. So I wouldn't arm wrestle over Tyreek Hill versus Brandon Ayuk.
Yeah, we should say too, tough matchup for Tyreek Hill. The Seahawks corners have been good so far this season, so that doesn't help. I mean, again, you like the big playability. You like that he's in this McDaniel offense. And I do feel safe that Tyreek's going to get 8+ targets in this game. Could even, hit double digits pretty easily. So even if it's less efficient, like, you're still getting good volume from this guy who can take any touch to the house.
Yeah, we're probably not getting the Malik Willis Packers offense here, no matter who the quarterback is.
Hope not.
Jameson Williams, we talked about on last week's show after his big week 1, didn't have a big game against the Bucs. We kind of touched on that with Jared Goff, but Jameson Williams did have 5 catches, 79 yards, 11 targets in that game, 20% target share in week 2. He trailed only Amon-Ra St. Brown in that category. To me, Jared, Jameson Williams is looking like a weekly wide receiver 3 at this point.
Yeah, I like him more now than I did at this time last week, despite the fact that week 2 was not as strong. Just because, like you said, Matt, we saw another game of strong usage, 20% target share, 36% of the team's air yards. Like, if he can stay in that realm all season, like we're talking about it, a guy who could finish top 25 among wide receivers, as a big play threat in a strong offense. So I think Jameson Williams at this point, you'd have to be stacked at wide receiver to not be starting him, especially in Sunday's matchup against Arizona.
If you look just at Rashid Shaheed's game log, then he looks like the kind of guy that you should sell because he's about to implode. Long touchdown catches in both games so far. 78% catch rate is almost certainly coming down and very soon. But what to like about this situation is the team passing volume is about to head up. It just is not going to stay a level where the Saints are throwing the ball on 35.5% of their offensive plays. And Shaheed has seen 23% target share through 2 weeks. So Jared, Shaheed looks to me very similar to Jameson Williams going forward.
Yeah, no, I agree. And 23% target share probably comes down a bit. but he could finish around, 20% because it's Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed, and Alvin Kamara in this offense. Like the ball's not going anywhere else, in the passing game in particular. So, and the other thing about Shaheed, really fun usage so far. He already has 3 deep targets. He already has 2 screen targets, and he already has 3 carries. So the Saints are clearly looking to get him the ball in all sorts of ways. The way the offense is humming right now in this matchup against Philadelphia, I think Shaheed's a pretty easy starter, kind of right in that same range as Jameson Williams.
And we already saw him specifically beat a Dallas defensive set that was pretty much set up to stop Shaheed from doing that downfield thing. He was like faster than that. So you're not going to be able to do it, guys. Jaxon Smith-Njigba maybe had a breakout last week. I don't know. What are we doing with Jaxon Smith-Njigba going forward? Is it time to just put him into your lineup every week?
That week 2 was awesome to see because I was even starting to lose faith. And we probably ranked him too low for week 2 after the week 1, which was really underwhelming, following the obviously underwhelming rookie season. But week 2 is everything we wanted to see. JSN up to a 10.6 yard average depth of target. Love that. 36% target share. He actually set career highs last week in route rate, target share, and air yard share. So kind of as we hoped for this summer, like Ryan Grubb is using Jaxon Smith-Njigba all over the field rather than all the short stuff he was doing last year. So it is just one game. Love to see it again. But I think JSN definitely in the wide receiver 3 mix this week in a good matchup in the slot against the Dolphins.
Yeah, we're just 2 games in, but he's currently tied with DK Metcalf for the team lead in targets, leads the team in receptions, has doubled Tyler Lockett in targets so far. The ADOT is right in line with those guys too. 9.9 through 2 games, according to Pro Football Reference, 11.7 for DK Metcalf, 10.8 for Tyler Lockett. Those were much bigger differences last year among these players. So very positive start. We'll see where it goes from here. Terry McLaurin, Jared, what is the case for him this week beyond? You tell me.
For starters, if I could help it, I would not want to use Terry McLaurin this week. I'd like to see just him in the passing game get going. Mostly him, honestly. Jaden Daniels has been efficient throwing to everyone but Terry McLaurin so far. And that's kind of the buy case for him. He's definitely the team's best receiver. So there's no reason his efficiency should be lagging the rest of the team. McLaurin has a 22.6% target share. That's a fine number. It's actually, he's been like very consistent throughout his career in terms of target share. He's like always between like 22 and 24%. And that's where he is through a couple weeks this season. So I just expect Jaden Daniels to get better. I expect his connection with McLaurin to get better. So I think, tepid buy on McLaurin. I would not, pay up for him, but he's also sitting wide receiver 62 through 2 games. So he should be pretty cheap to acquire. And if you can get him for cheap, I'd take a shot. I think there's still a chance he's like a weekly wide receiver 3 as we get deeper into the season.
Yeah, I'm not sure how high the ceiling climbs, so I wouldn't go crazy after him either. But, if you got somebody looking to unload him, why not take a shot and see what happens? Because it should improve from where it is. If you're still watching or listening, then we're clearly doing something for you, even if you're hate watching. Either way, please hit that YouTube subscribe button, like, follow, favorite on your chosen podcast platform. Helps us know how many people are looking for this content every week, and it lets you know anytime we drop something new. So we both get something out of it. Let's wrap this up with tight ends, Jared. And Jake Ferguson seems like he might be on the verge of returning in week 3. Stephen Jones said Monday that Ferguson was, quote, really close to playing against the Saints on Sunday. Probably fortunate for Ferguson that he didn't have to be involved in that game. He did return to a limited practice on Wednesday after no practices on his injured knee last week. He's sitting tight end 9 in our PPR rankings right now. So we're expecting him back, right?
Yeah, expecting him back. It's kind of a wait and see situation, right? Like you'd love to see him get in at least one full practice this week to feel better about him. But we all know how crappy the tight end landscape is right now. So like if Jake Ferguson's playing, in most cases, you're probably starting him. This Cowboys-Ravens game has one of the highest over-unders of the week. So it should be a good game environment for Ferguson.
Isaiah Likely did not deliver for you in week 2 like he did in week 1. We knew it was coming down, but it was a big difference. 9 catches, 111, and a touchdown with almost a second in week 1. 2 catches, 26 yards, 3 targets in week 2. What are you doing with Likely now?
Yeah, and the 2 catches last week would be fine if his playing time had remained the same as week 1, but it did not. His snap rate sunk from 66% to 49%. More importantly, his route rate, 69% in week 1, down to 49% in week 2. You can't live there and be a viable fantasy play. Now, I think this is going to be a situation where it's going to vary from week to week, which makes it really tough in fantasy football, just not knowing what you're going to get. This seems like a week where it could spike back up in a high scoring game against Dallas. Definitely a chance the Ravens fall behind here. So Likely has the upside. He has, top 5 fantasy upside. We saw the floor last week as well. So it's a team by team choice, whether you're starting Likely. And again, I think we're all just kind of going to be guessing, how big a role he's going to play from week to week.
Yeah, buckle up. I mean, we're probably not even going to have our answer by the end of week 3 either, because that'll still just be 3 games. So we're learning this stuff. And one of the challenges is it's such a short season that sometimes you just don't learn. It's never clear at any point, and you're guessing all along. So, we're going to make our best guesses as we always do, but Isaiah Likely is probably going to be frustrating. Mike Gesicki faces a similar issue and didn't set up the expectations heading into week 2 like Isaiah Likely did, but has the same issue that he's working off of, and now maybe has people making similar decisions going forward. 7 catches, 91 yards on 9 targets in that week 2 game against the Chiefs. But Jared, what is his specific issue?
It's playing time. Cincinnati's used 3 tight ends in both of their first 2 games, and Gesicki's led the group in playing time, but he ran her out on just 46% of dropbacks in week 1 and then 51% in week 2. Gesicki leads all tight ends by a pretty significant margin in targets per route run. He's drawn a target on 35% of his routes. That's not going to continue. It's probably going to be like cut in half by the time we get end of the season. So I would just be very careful with Gesicki. He could be in play this week because of this Washington matchup. To me, it would really come down to T. Higgins. T. Higgins remains out, and I think Gesicki, you can use him as a flyer. If Higgins is back, I would definitely try not to use Gesicki this week.
I do think that he'll stay good in targets per route versus his position, because there's not a whole lot else that Gesicki does besides run well and jump well. So if he's out on the field, then they have passing plans for him. And if he's out on the field with other tight ends, then it's the other guys that are doing the blocking. So that helps that target efficiency, but the playing time, you mentioned it with Likely. If you're getting about 50% route participation, you're not somebody that we can trust in weekly fantasy lineups. And the targets are going to head elsewhere as Jamar Chase gets more involved and T. Higgins returns to health. So if you're wondering this week if you should pick up Gesicki, it's probably not. But if you're, hard up at tight end, then you could be worse.
Yep, that's fair.
Zach Ertz is kind of the opposite of Mike Gesicki. Nothing exciting yet. 4 catches for 62 against the Giants, 3 catches against the Bucs, 8 targets through 2 games, but playing time's been really good.
Yeah, to me, Zach Ertz is doing exactly what you hoped he would do if you drafted him as, an early season fantasy option. At least he's finished tight end 16 and tight end 8 in PPR points. Route rates 79% and 84%, 15% target share. He's just out there doing enough to be a low end tight end 1. I bet he finishes somewhere between tight end 8 and tight end 16 this week. And for a lot of teams, that's as good as you can do.
Yeah, it should be on his business card right now. So if that helps your team, go ahead and grab Zach Ertz. If you're wondering, should I pick up Mike Gesicki off of that big week against the Chiefs or Zach Ertz in your PPR league, I would take Zach Ertz, because 4 catches for 62 is not exciting, but it's closer to what you can expect on a weekly basis from Ertz, at least until Jaden Daniels figures out that Terry McLaurin exists. We talked streaming defenses for this week and next in Tuesday's waiver show. So if you're wondering about that position, check out the Tuesday show, or you can just head to draftsharks.com, check your free agent finder. You can see exactly what defenses are available in your specific league and how they fit with what you already have rostered. See who you should pick up, see who you should start. If you're not yet a DS Insider and you can't do that, then check the show notes below for a discount on your regular season subscription, and let us become your unfair advantage.